Welcome back to the End of the Day Show. I'm your host, Matt Parker. Hope everybody had a great Labor Day. Always think of Labor Day as the end of the summer. And over the weekend, we had a very, very fascinating story that I want to unpack from my perspective. It was an article or essay written by Paul Graham, notorious for starting Y Combinator and writing essays. He's pretty much done those two things in the past decade that has made him one of the more relevant people in Silicon Valley. So he had an article on Flounder Mode, which we'll unpack. Also, we'll get into some other news that has happened over the past couple days. So let's get started with the show. So I was spent some time in the Pacific Northwest over Labor Day weekend. Wife had a good friend that had a wedding. So we went up to Seattle, and as I was strolling Twitter, I think in between something, it was a very long wedding. It was like 7 hours. So had some downtime, and I came across the Flounder Mode article from Paul Graham. Paul Graham, obviously a notorious Silicon Valley personality, leader. He started some companies back in the day. He actually started a company that he sold called ViaWeb, and then he started Y Combinator. And he's really been notorious for being a very hot take guy. And Flounder Mode is his latest article that he wrote that just sent shockwaves through the internet in Silicon Valley, and everybody had an opinion of it. I had some opinions that I posted regarding it, but it basically was this highlight of this conversation that Brian Chesky, who's the CEO founder of Airbnb, had at Y Combinator recently. And it's something that I think Brian Chesky, who's been very adamant about this approach in many talks, so it's not something necessarily new, but it did strike a chord within the zeitgeist of Silicon Valley Twitter. And so I wanted to highlight it a bit. He starts the conversation off talking about Brian Chesky giving this talk, and most founders said it was the best talk that they'd heard. Ron Conway, who's also notorious here in the Valley, said for the first time in his life he did not take notes. I'm not going to try to reproduce it here. Instead, he wants to talk about the question that was raised. In general, this question relates to how you manage a company as a founder. And what I found so intriguing about this story is it is odd for this perspective to be put out for founders that are managing very small companies, right? Y Combinator is notorious for investing $500,000 into your company for 7% stake. Many of their companies go on to flounder and not really become a great, large, massive outcome, unlike Airbnb, which is probably their most successful company to date. So it's kind of a typical conversation, right? You have someone who's been very successful using a certain program. They are now almost the ambassador for continuing to preach that gospel to the next set of founders. And Flounder Mode seems to be that. It seems to be Paul Graham pumping up Steve Jobs and Brian Chesky as great leaders of companies, and how Flounder Mode exists. And it kind of creates a very dual effect of, like, there's two ways to run a company, right? There's Flounder Mode and there's manager mode. And he has a very, very strong critique of managers. He considers them to be people who go to business school. He considers them to be very not real contributors, essentially, not real builders, as they would probably say. And Flounder Mode is this way to be effective, right? It basically says that managers are people who are just micromanagers, right? Or they try to avoid micromanagement. Like, they just want to give people they want to empower people to go be their best selves. Hire good people and give them room to get their ideas out. Lead, and he basically says that these people are professional fakers, which is very ironic, because I don't think that in any way, shape, or form, like, I think Y Combinator has always had this view, and this very kind of bad view of MBAs, right? People, MBAs, or professional people that work at these companies. And there is some truth to that, right? Like, there are company men or company women and builder women and builder men in Silicon Valley. There is a true dichotomy between those two people, right? I'd never gotten my MBA, and actually was talking to a friend who has an MBA from Stanford GSB, and I was talking with him. Now he's a VC, and I asked him, like, am I missing something to my credential, right? I don't have this, top level Ivy League, Stanford MBA on my profile. What am I missing? And should I still do it, or is it something that's just relevant? And he almost laughed at me. He said, you don't need that, right? Based on where you are in your career, based on what you've done, you've already done a lot of the things that people in their MBA programs learn how to do, which is like start companies or raise venture capital or hire people or sell, right? You have that real experience. You don't need an MBA to do it. And there's always been this kind of like battle between the MBA versus the founder. And there are many founders that have MBAs. So this initial conversation, professional managers, MBAs versus founders, it's already kind of a blown out of proportion, because you could be both. You could have an MBA and be a founder, or you could be a founder without an MBA, right? It's not necessarily, these two things aren't completely unaligned. So what is Flounder Mode? Well, he basically says that the principle of a CEO engaging only with direct reports, it may involve skip-level meetings as a norm. It allows for more direct involvement across the organization. And the biggest example that he gave, which is actually something that I've done myself personally, professionally, is create this list of the 100 most important people that I want to meet with, and continually work my way through trying to get interactions with these people, whether it be lunch, coffee, meetings, at a conference, at an event. But he basically says that Steve Jobs had this annual retreat back at Apple where he would actually rank the most important people at Apple and invite only those people to this conference. It wasn't based on hierarchy. So you could be a CFO, COO of a company, and you weren't in the top 100 people, right? How did he come up with this list? I don't know. Maybe it's based on, just his feel, his emotion of how well they contribute. But this is kind of the way that Paul Graham thinks that CEOs should lead companies. Some observations were that founders often feel gaslit when told to run companies like managers. VCs without founding experience, he also took a shot at them, may not understand how founders should run companies. C-level executives can be very skilled at managing up. So it's basically like people are taught to be these managers, and these aren't the type of people that founders should be. Flounder Mode is not well documented and understood. Well, until now, because this article went super crazy. Every publication and news source in business talked about this. It's all over Twitter. It's even over Instagram. May vary from company to company and change over time, and could lead to better company performance. Some successful founders may already be practicing aspects of this, right? Again, this is a very general, this is what Y Combinator is about, right? I always believe this. It's about these broad generalizations and these very well marketed views of how you should manage and run companies, and particularly startups. Because again, Y Combinator has for so long held the keys to access in venture capital, or theoretically held the keys. There's a lot of companies that did not do Y Combinator that are very successful, but Y Combinator theoretically has held the keys, and they've almost used Paul Graham's essays as the Bible of how you start companies. And so this is just a continual iteration of that, right? His predictions were that Flounder Mode will become better understood and documented. It will be more complicated but more effective than Manager Mode. Some founders previously seen as eccentric may be vindicated, and the concept may be misused by those unable to delegate or non-founders trying to act like founders. So it's a pretty simple formula. Founders are almost like given the keys and given the right through this article to be assholes, which many founders already are. There's another debate of like, can you be a successful founder if you're not an asshole? I mean, we look at the most successful, wealthy people in tech in the past decade or past 25 years. Bill Gates, Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, all these names, all these people were assholes. These were not and are not men that you typically want to be around and work with, which is so ironic because they've been so successful in building companies. But the question has to be, how do you manage a company like this? And more importantly, for the people that are in Y Combinator right now who were hearing this talk, who are reading this and dissecting Paul Graham as the gospel of technology in Silicon Valley, how relevant is this conversation to you? My position was, you are crazy to think you can go in Flounder Mode if you're not already in a certain rank and position with your company. What do I mean by that? If you're a company that's yet to be doing $1 million in AR, don't even think about Flounder Mode. If you're doing 10 million, maybe you can have the conversation. But I don't believe these themes and these theses and these considered objective approaches to management can work until you have a certain sustained level of success. Brian Chesky can say these things because he's the CEO founder of a $75 billion company, and he's worth over $10 billion alone as an individual. Steve Jobs can have these approaches because but you, on the other hand, me, on the other hand, we have to take a different approach, right? We have to understand. Wanted to highlight a new partner we're working with here on the End of the Day show, and this company is Flippa. Flippa is a company where you have the ability to buy and sell blogs, e-commerce stores, affiliate websites, SaaS businesses, all the different types of solutions and apps that we're now building online. Let's be honest, we're digital first people. Everybody has an app, everybody has a newsletter, a podcast, all that stuff. Flippa is allowing you to get a free valuation of your business based on a couple of questions. Even if you're not trying to sell, I will tell you that as a startup founder and now as a content creator, you always want to know your value. Think of them like, if you're a startup founder, think of Flippa as giving you kind of like a 409A valuation of your company, of anything, of your newsletter, of your podcast, of your YouTube account. They're able to do it all in a simple couple minutes form, and then you get a valuation, and they have lots of active investors. So definitely check out Flippa. Make sure you tell them that you found out about it through the End of the Day show. We have a special link that you see right below here that allows you to utilize their platform. It's basic, it's very simple. It's referral.flippa.com/EOD. That's again, referral.flippa.com/EOD. Thanks for them for supporting independent media. You are in a position, if you're a founder, you're a CEO, and you're thinking about Flounder Mode or where you need to be, I think the best advice is to actually follow some of what Paul Graham is saying, right? But don't over-index on trying to imply these management principles to how you run your company. I remember when I was new to the scene of tech, and there was this whole idea around holacracy, right? It was a book that was written, and it was very much focused on this management style. And if I can even remember the basics was that it was just it was basically like this management system that was supposed to redefine the way management works and turn everyone into a leader. It distributed authority and decision-making throughout an organization and defined people not by hierarchy and titles, but by roles. Holacracy creates organizations that are fast, agile, and that succeed by pursuing their purpose, not following a dated artificial plan. One of the biggest champions of this type of management was actually Tony Hsieh, RIP, who started Zappos, along with Evan Williams and a few others. And at that time, it was very much talked about as this new management style, this new way to lead a company. And it kind of fell flat on its face over time. You don't hear much about it now. And I think some of these adaptions, and although Paul Graham means well, a lot of these things are going to be taken way to the extreme. And when you just look at how these companies are working, I think Eric Newcomer put it well in a meme where you place side by side Airbnb's stock as a public company beside Uber's stock as a public company. And I was like looking at the numbers where I'm a Uber Travis Kalanick, also known as Uncle Trav fan, just as much as the next man. Right? A lot of his principles and the way he approached building Uber, good or bad, were the way that a lot of founders became excited about how they could be a founder and how they could run a company. But when you look at the math and you look at Uber as a public company, their success has been great with the leader that they have. That leader is not a founder. That leader is a manager. When you look at Satya Nadella at Microsoft, he's a manager. Right? They may practice some of these founder-led principles, but at the end of the day, you can be a manager and run a very, very tight ship in a very, very successful company. You could also be a founder and run the company off the rails. And no knock to Airbnb. I think they have done a lot of great things. I personally don't use the product because it's been a very much a nightmare for me the past few times I've used it. But their public stock, since they've become public, is down 15%. They haven't been performing at the rate of other companies. So I think it's hard to have these fast, loose plays, and we do this in Silicon Valley because we obviously want to admire, we want to acknowledge and show our love to the successful people. And I know that Y Combinator does this because they want to put up and they want to support the most successful founders that they have. But at the end of the day, some of these things go crazy, and you'll end up with a young founder of a company that probably is not even doing $1 million in revenue, thinking that they can go and lead their company like Steve Jobs or Brian Chesky. Not to say that they can't become those people over time, but in the real time, you should be focused on what matters to your company today, right? And it's not really these quasi-strategic management principles. It's being a good CEO, right? Keeping enough cash in the bank so your company can reach the point of success, understanding product market fit, providing great customer service, talking to customers, handling support tickets, right? Hiring slow and firing fast. Some of these are principles that aren't mentioned in Flounder Mode, but they're very, very essential to being a founder. So, in all, I think Flounder Mode's a great thing. It obviously went viral. It got a lot of traction. But don't over-index on trying to do Founder Mode. You'll end up in Flounder Mode and you won't be successful with your company. That's all for today's show. Again, I'm Matt Parker. I am the founder of 4 Insights, who hosts this newsletter, podcast, YouTube show. Check us out at 4 Insights on YouTube, 4 Insights on Instagram, and have a great day.